We'll give everyone a few more moments. I see we're at about 32 participants, and I'm Caroline. So we'll be with you in just a minute. Thank you. And I just learned that people are coming off of a break. So how about that's even more reason to give another reason to pause. Let's see. We're climbing towards 40. Suzanne, what do you think? Do you want to dive in?
Yeah, I think let's go ahead.
Awesome. So we'll start with our introductions and get to know a little bit about you. So of course, people will join us as we go. So welcome. My name is Caroline Mailloux. I am the Senior Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Sarepta Therapeutics, which is a biotech in Boston and elsewhere that serves the rare disease community. And I am so excited to be here today with Suzanne Montgomery, who will introduce herself shortly. So in this session, we are going to demystify many things about accessibility and as part of that, disability. What is the digital, the spatial, the cultural? Who is it for? How do we become great allies? And we also encourage your participation throughout. So we'll be monitoring chat, but definitely want this to be a conversation that serves you. So even though it will largely be Suzanne and I chatting about the mix of our lived and professional experience, please dive in. So things you should know about me. I use she or they pronouns. I am proudly disabled and multiply disabled. I was born with a spinal cord disability. I am ambulatory, but I have a waist down is impacted by my spinal cord injury. I also have PTSD from pediatric medical trauma, and as an adult, thanks to COVID, was diagnosed with ADHD. So I am a neurodiverse person. I live with mental illness and I have physical disability, and I really did a good job ignoring that for most of my life and leveraging other parts of my privilege, whether that be education or race, to succeed in school, to succeed in the workplace. And it was really for me the surge of racial injustice in 2021 that really made me realize if I want to be an ally, this is a very real way that I can do that. So I came out as disabled almost near 40, which is somewhat ironic because diversity, equity, inclusion has always been a big part of my professional life. So for me, it's really been a big reckoning to say, I've always cared about this, and here's why, and really integrating that into my story as an ally, and as I like to say, a corporate rebel, or rebels for the greater good to ensure inclusion in our workplaces. And all of that has to do with why I'm so excited to be here today. Another one of my diversity identities that I come from a military family. So when I was asked to join Suzanne in this fireside chat, because Colin Powell is a founder or a co-founder of one of the partnering organizations for this conference, that was a huge honor for me to uphold his values, as well as continue to share a little bit about my story and hopefully bring more people on board for this inclusive movement for accessibility and disability inclusion in the workplace. So with that, I cannot wait for you to meet Suzanne.
Thank you so much, Caroline. That's a lot to live up to. So I'll give it a shot for myself. So let me start with a description of myself. I am I kind of dread saying these words, a middle-aged white woman with long blonde hair. I wear glasses. And I'm wearing a white blouse with a black design on it. I am very, very excited to be here to talk with you all today. It's been so fun getting to know Caroline over the last couple of weeks as we've been preparing for this. Professionally, I serve as AT&T's Chief Accessibility Officer. In that role, I am responsible for providing tools and resources to help our product design and communications and marketing and customer advocacy teams design our products and services in a way that they are usable for all of our customers, including our customers with disabilities. I myself can be a corporate rebel, so I expanded this role just kind of on my own. I shouldn't say that. I've got an amazing team, and it was really their idea a few years ago to take a hard look internally to ensure that we give that same level of diligence for the tools and resources, and very importantly, career pathing that we provide to employees and prospective employees with disabilities. It is an area of diversity that needs sometimes some accessible design. You know, our products don't always work. There's a barrier with the product that makes it sometimes not as usable for people with disabilities. The same thing with tools in the workplace. So I fight every day to ensure that that is not the case here at AT&T. I myself have suffered from I guess, mental disabilities throughout my adulthood from some things that happened in my childhood. And I have become a big advocate in this community. The more I've learned about it and the more I've immersed myself with it. I'm very excited about this conversation and what we can do to kind of educate you and bring you into the conversation. So we wanted to start by knowing more about our audience so that we can tailor the conversation to you. So we have a poll. If our support can help us with that. If you all could take just a couple of minutes to answer this poll for us so that we know where you're coming from and why you're joining us here today, and that will help us have a more relevant conversation for you.
Caroline and Suzanne, while we're waiting for people to complete the poll, we do have one person who raised their hands. Bridget, would you like to go ahead and ask your question? Oh, maybe that was just a mistake. No worries.
Sorry. Hi there.
Oh, hello.
Hi. I'm based in South Africa, and the question that I have currently is, I'm supporting artists in all aspects, visual. I mean, the visual artists, the writers, and so I'm in the process of creating a space for them, converting my property to a residency. So I'm looking into catering for differently abled participants in the creative space. So I would like to further engage, you know, in terms of what would be needed in terms of the place to be conducive.
Bridget, thank you for the question. This is Caroline. So I would say that is a very specific question, and it sounds like it's very geared towards, or if I summarize it, it's how do we make a space for artists that is spatially inclusive and accessible. So my hope is that we'll touch upon a lot of themes, and whether it be color contrast or Braille on bathroom signs, and the many ways accessibility can manifest in a physical space. So how does it sound that we'll work to integrate those themes in throughout, and we can circle back at the end? Please raise your hand and remind us if we can go even more specific to that.
I'd appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Awesome. I love what you're doing, and thank you so much for championing it in this room today. So it looks like the poll is just about in. And as we, and thank you to Suzanne for launching that. So if we look at who's in the room today, it looks like the vast majority of people here want to learn about the whole mix of technology, physical space, as Bridget brought up, and the culture of inclusion. It looks like the majority of people, 70%, when asked how familiar are you with accessibility issues in the workplace, 70% have some prior exposure or experience, with some being very new and some being very experienced. So that's great. It sounds like everyone will learn something new today. When we asked, do you have a disability? 73% said yes. 73% said no, and 27% said yes. So we are majority group that identifies as non-disabled, though I'm guessing if we were to re-ask that question and re-ask a disability inclusive of neurodiversity, physical and mobility differences, mental illness, and other things, and chronic illness, if people might answer differently if we included a more inclusive definition. And when we asked about career status, 58% are established professionals and 33% are early professionals. We have a handful of educators, and we don't have any students with us. So Suzanne and I will leverage that to target our responses to a professional setting versus a student-based setting. So thank you. That is a huge help to ensure we bring you into the conversation today.
Well, so Caroline, why don't we get started on some of the substantive topics? And you started out so inclusively, especially as you expanded the definition of disability, because I think a lot of people who are new to this field and new to this conversation think of disabilities as visible disabilities. And you see somebody who's wearing a hearing aid, you see somebody in a wheelchair, you see somebody using Braille to read, but we know, and we learn more and more every day, that disability is so much more than that. It's neurodiverse, and it's mental illness and chronic diseases. And we just are going through a pandemic now, and people with long haul COVID probably has become a chronic illness, or it's exacerbated existing illnesses and maybe turned them into chronic illnesses. And they every time in recent years a new statistic comes out on the number of people with disabilities, the number gets higher. So I've got my opinion on whether that number goes up or why that number goes up. I'd love to hear your opinion and your thoughts on that.
I agree with that entirely in terms of the universal relevance of this. And in addition to, for me, I definitely practice an inclusive definition of disability, but a further breakdown of that is being temporarily disabled, situationally disabled, or permanently disabled. So for example, a temporary disability might be, I sprained my ankle and I'm wearing crutches. A situational disability might be, I only have one use of my arm because I'm carrying a box or carrying a baby. So with the example Suzanne gave about COVID and long haul COVID, and I don't want to speak for everyone, though I think it's safe to say all of us have experienced major changes in our worlds at the combination of at home and at work, and that is stressful. And many people have experienced mental health or faced unresolved mental health issues, for example, not being able to leave the house. things like that. So I'm a big believer in the universal nature of disability, because the world is constantly changing, whether it be pandemic or other things. And the Russian roulette of life, which is I could trip and sprain my ankle walking to get my mail on any given day of the week, lunging myself into a new disability experience that I might not have been born with, or certainly was not planning on for that day. So to me, the more allies we have to recognize this isn't just those people, this really is all of us, even if not permanently, or from birth or any of those things. To me, that's the real foundational point of empathy, and just good old research to say this is why this matters.
Yeah, and and I'll add to that. And you shared your story of kind of coming out as a disabled person. I have a similar story with my depression and anxiety, and I think as look, let's face it, there's a stigma, right, for people with disabilities, and I think mental health disabilities, maybe even there's a stronger stigma. But the more people talk about it, the more leaders are out there talking about their stories, and great organizations like America's Promise putting together conversations like this. People feel more comfortable. I can share my story because I heard so and so. I heard Caroline share hers. Makes me a little bit more comfortable, and and I think that's a major reason why the number is going up. Not that we're becoming a more disabled society, but people are more comfortable sharing who they are with their families, at their workplaces, in their social communities, and that enables so much. It enables more resources because there's a broader population. It enables a better conversation, and it creates a better community when people can be their authentic selves and contribute to society with that authenticity. I think we're all the better. So I'll get off my soapbox there, but
Stay on it. I love every word of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, what that makes me think of, and I don't ever want to say pandemic is a good thing, ever. This has been terrible, horrible, no good, very bad times, and continued times. Our worlds will never be the same. But to me, a sliver of a silver lining is that workplaces have needed to readjust, and changes that the disability community for accessing the workplace, whether that be accessing digitally, and can I work from home, or can I get this equipment at home, or it's painful for me to need to walk to the bus, to ride public transportation, when I've been in transit for an hour and a half. Something that pandemic has done for us, I think, is twofold. We've proven that people are still productive working from home, and that doesn't just benefit people with disabilities, it benefits many people, whether it be working parents, whether it be people who are caregivers to other people in their family. So to me, that's a great one. And as part of that is, I feel like managers have had to, in order to retain people, in order to baseline good managers, I feel used to be, you could get away with being a smart jerk who performed really well and wasn't necessarily a good manager. And I see shifts everywhere happening, not just in my company. This was a major reason I wanted to join my company, was saying, if you are not a manager who's checking in on your people and asking how they are, if you are not a manager who's checking in with your people and saying, what do you need to thrive? So even if you're not saying like, I would hope you wouldn't say to a person, you seem depressed, because that is certainly a medical diagnosis that I am not qualified to make as a manager. But to be the person that says, we're having we're all under a lot of stress right now. How are you? How can I support you to thrive? To me, those are all just changes that I'm not sad about, that I see making workplaces more accessible across the board.
Yeah, and I think about my own journey as a leader over the last, however long we've been in this, 18, 20 months, whatever it is, and practices I've added to kind of my leadership portfolio that I didn't do before. I start every staff meeting now with a check-in with my team, and it's everything from a couple weeks ago, tell me about your Halloween, what did you guys do, to, this was a rough week, we made a major announcement at the company, how's everybody feeling, or somebody lost a relative, let's, are you comfortable sharing, and just using a part of that meeting to bring the team together and to give people that open forum, and sharing of myself. And something I didn't do before, because I was very work focused, very objective. We have business deliverables we have to get done. Let's get them done, and let's use the time in this meeting to do that. But that caring for the team and showing both my authenticity and transparency as well as my caring creates for a much better team, and modeling that behavior so that it then is paid forward with other organizations and other groups is so very important. The other thing that I've seen as again, if you can say positive out of a pandemic, which I kind of get the heebie-jeebies as I'm saying, is the technology revolution that's come in the last 20 months. We're using Zoom now. I don't know about our audience, but I never heard of Zoom until March of 2020. And now, we live and die by Zoom, but all the tools have just been improving and improving, and ease of use, usability, better design. Zoom's not quite where I would like it to be from an accessibility standpoint, because it's still very manual to have captions, but it's getting there. And other tools are also leading the way. There's some other ones out there, and that leveling of the playing field, where there's the technology can make our lives better and more useful. And we lived by technology in the last 20 months. And, there's been the digital divide that has happened. I've seen it with school, where all of a sudden every American school child on the same day was sent home, and some had technology, some didn't. And we as a country in the world need to get better at that. There's progress being made. We'll kind of park that conversation. It's a different topic, but making sure that students with disabilities, educators with disabilities, professionals with disabilities have the tools they need to be successful. I see us on a positive path, not where we need to be. I don't think anyone would accept that, but so much better than we were early on. Caroline, what are your thoughts?
That everything about that resonates. And matter of factly, I do have two kids who I experienced this with. We are in a place where they're a majority internet household. So I want to acknowledge that I understand it as a systematic issue. It is not one that was, or it was more front and center to me, what was happening with workplace trends. But Suzanne, what you said that really resonated with me was this idea that you and I are both, I actually don't believe they're experts when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, because it's such a continuous learning journey. But when it comes to you and I being professionals who operate in this space, we've both given examples of how much we've learned in recent years. And you mentioned like you had no idea what Zoom was and how that worked. And pandemic really made me realize that accessibility in the digital sense was one of my biggest blind spots as a disability champion. I do wear glasses. I'm wearing contact lenses right now. I do not experience any loss of hearing, though it's likely that I will as I age, or statistically speaking, there might be some sort of accident. But that I've learned a ton about that in recent years because of the need to access things digitally. And that is closed captioning. That is what our employees' experience of applying to a job. When do they get to champion themselves? Is the onus on them to need to say, these are my accommodations? Or does a manager say, hey, what do you need to thrive? And have it be more part of a holistic assessment of what do you need outside of a formal HR accommodations process. So when it comes to touch points where employees can be most seen and supported, as well as how many relatively I don't want to say simple things, but when it comes to how much difference a second monitor can have to improve your workplace experience. For me this year, I got occupational lenses with blue light filter and magnification, and that prevented headaches for me. So this is like the whole range of assistive technology, adaptive technology, accommodations. I feel I'm proud of how I have grown, even though I have largely always been a disability champion, but really lived through my own lens, which was largely physical disability and mental disability prior to pandemic.
Well, and I have two thoughts on everything you just said, which I agree with completely. The first is we all come to this issue from our own background and what we've experienced and what we've seen. So the diversity need to not be in an echo chamber, particularly in the accessibility space, is so important. You need people with diverse life experiences, diverse ability, diverse background, diverse ages, diverse everything, because the needs are different, the technology barriers are different. And so leveraging people are experts about themselves. So leveraging that kind of expertise is so important. So for the business leaders out there and the people coming up in their professions, do you have in your organization an employee resource group? Sometimes they're called affinity groups or business resource groups for employees with disabilities or employees who are allies of people with disabilities. Leverage them. You have built-in leadership. And if your business doesn't have one of them, consider starting one. My guess is there's a need. Statistically, you're going to have 20+% of your workforce is going to be people with disabilities, and you add in the people with loved ones and allies, your numbers are just going to balloon. Bring them to the table to find out, are the tools that you have for your employees accessible? Are they usable? And are the resources you're providing your customers, are they as well? You have your built-in break from the echo chamber and diversity. The other thought, Caroline, I had in the things you were talking about was the tools and resources and experiences we provide to employees, making sure we break down the accessibility barriers on the front end. So not when you're sourcing a tool for your employees, a technology tool or what have you, doing your own testing to make sure it's accessible and not necessarily taking the vendor word for it. And there's organizations out there that will give kind of seals of approval, but they're barely scratching the surface and not necessarily meeting the needs of your employees and of your workforce. And so doing that on testing yourself, what are the expectations of your business? And what are things that you can do to make that employee experience so much more meaningful from the hiring stage through the life cycle? So if you do online applications for employment, and I know most companies do these days, is it accessible? From the very, very beginning, are you telling people with disabilities that they are employees you want to hire? If your website is not accessible for online applications, you've lost that audience and the amazing talent probably. Is there a career path for employees with disabilities, or are they kind of parked in one job? Are they being included in talent development programs? Are there leaders with disabilities who are willing to share their stories? People age into disabilities. It's the only area of diversity that you can wake up one day and be a member of. And are your leadership team talking about their disabilities to remove the stigma within your company? And so people with disabilities know, heck, there's a career path for me because so-and-so is the fill in the blank really important title. So having that workplace experience and being deliberate about it, setting goals, measuring against those goals, I think is so critical. Are you muted, Caroline?
I did it to be courteous and I was muted. Thank you for the reminder. Suzanne, you touched upon so many amazing granular things there that we can do to be more accessible as leaders and managers. We're coming towards our last final 5 minutes or so before we open it up to questions. So I wanted to build upon that in terms of two things. One, reminding everyone about the intersectional experience of disability, intersectional from an age standpoint, intersectional from a, it is one of the only diversity identities that is cross-cutting across race and ethnicity and location and all of those things. And because of intersectionality, it is a different experience to be, for example, a Black woman versus a Hispanic man, and identify with disability and how you navigate the world, because these things all intersect with each other in really profound, important, complicated, and nuanced ways. So when I think about people always are like, what can I do as an ally, as a constant learner? Most people here said you have some prior exposure to this work. One of my favorite resources is from an Accenture report, and they outline these 8 pillars that I love about how to center people with disability, and by centering people with disability, how to create an accessible workplace. And some of the pillars that they give are have clear role models, like Suzanne mentioned, employees resource groups, like Suzanne mentioned, parental leave, fair and transparent pay, training opportunities, also Suzanne touched upon, flexible working options, freedom to innovate. And to me, what I love about those when it comes to being a person who creates accessible workplaces, I hope we can all agree that those are all things that every employee of any identity, disabled or not, can benefit from to thrive at work. So to me, it again circles around and highlights that this is not an us and them. This is not a people who look one way and the person in the wheelchair who matches the symbol, the international icon of how we interpret disability. It's so much more than that in the day-to-day lived experience. But to me, there's so much we can do every day, even in the language we use, the questions we ask people, especially because there is a big fear of budget, and whether that budget be about technology or needing to physically transform our spaces. And while, of course, some of those are gold standard and legal standard, when it comes to places and spaces, a small series of little things, I would argue, is far more impactful when it comes to our workplaces than a huge campaign or something that is more universally visible.
Yeah, and Caroline, that actually gets to a question that we got from Grace on small organizations making investments. So much of so Grace, thank you for the question, a really, really great question. So much of what it takes to make a truly inclusive workplace doesn't actually cost a whole lot. As Caroline was saying, a lot of it is just in the culture of an organization. And I like to talk a lot about intellectual curiosity and human curiosity. That tell me about yourself, let me learn from you, and let me tell you about myself and share from myself to get you more comfortable. And having those kind of conversations in the workplace to help people feel safe bringing their own selves, that's free. You know, open, transparent conversation costs you nothing and is a key component to a good quality culture. There's things that also don't, in my view, shouldn't cost a lot, but having good quality software for the tools that your employees use. And accessible software is usable software. So if you test for accessibility and require it of your vendors, it makes for a usable tool for everybody. So your employees become more efficient. If the software you use for, say, your time reporting is really clunky, and it's not accessible, just making it accessible will make it better for everybody. You know, there's a cartoon that gets sent around in the winter months every year, and it's of a school, and it's a child in a wheelchair waiting for the custodian to shovel the ramp, and a bunch of kids walking up stairs. He has just finished shoveling, and the custodian turns to him and said, "Now I need to get the stairs clear first, because that's most of the people, so you just need to wait. And then the little thought bubble for the boy says, but if you did the ramp, everybody can use the ramp. And that concept of accessibility benefits everybody, because good, usable, open, transparent tools and communication benefits everybody in the workplace. And look, I completely understand business budgets, so it's build a plan. Accessibility is a journey. You're not going to be there overnight, but you have a starting point. You're going to know what your starting point is. Have your 1-year plan, your 3-year plan, your 5-year plan, and work towards it. Embrace your employee base on what their most immediate needs are and what will really transform to improve the company for them. That'll really help you get started.
Awesome. As other questions come in, I was thinking we could circle back to Bridget's question. We didn't actually touch a ton upon physical access. And to me, that actually does matter a lot for budget, and does matter a lot as workplaces think about, do we go hybrid? Do we go things like that? So Bridget, one resource, and I will see if I can look it up. Jenny Lay Flurry, she is an accessibility and disability leader at Microsoft. And a lot of what I've learned about this, I've learned from her, because she really had to champion herself at work. So when it comes to small things we can do that may or may not have a lot of budget, it's not a good thing for access to have carpets on the floor that we can trip on. It is a good thing if there are glass doors to have like a slight shadowing to ensure we're not walking into doors. It's a great thing for physical spaces to ensure that we have big color contrast. So for example, if there's a chair against a wall, if they are similar colors, color blindness is a really relevant disability. And also things like gender neutral bathrooms. And if we have things like handicap accessible bathrooms or disability accessible bathrooms or gender neutral bathrooms, ensuring that it's not just one in the basement versus everywhere, because if any one person needs to adapt their way of working to access a basic need like water or food or hand washing, it means that we really need to rethink what that is. So having water fountains at 2 different levels for someone who may be shorter, who may be a wheelchair, who may be youth. To me, those are types of things that when thinking about space, it's kind of like thinking about that idea of pressure testing. Like, would this work for a person in a wheelchair, a person on crutches, a person who tires easily, my 2-year-old niece? It's kind of just, and the more people who are involved in that process from an early stage, to me, that's one of the best ways to ensure a space or a product or a culture are the most accessible possible, is co-create it with as many people as possible from start to finish. And that is my hope for you as you launch your nonprofit for artists, is involve them in the process. And I believe it will be the best space possible for their needs.
Okay, so I think we have neared the end of our session. Any final questions before we close out? Bridget, Jenny, it's Jenny Lay Flurry. She's the Chief Accessibility Officer at Microsoft. You can follow her on LinkedIn. She posts really amazing blogs and shares both her corporate journey and her personal journey pretty openly. I have learned an amazing amount from her over the last several years. So I think with that, I'm going to thank everybody for their time and their attention. This has been such an amazing conversation. I just encourage everyone, particularly those in the business world, to be very deliberate about inclusive workplaces and inclusive design. I know we didn't get to talk to the handful of educators in the room, but think about, how do you educate that upcoming group of leaders? And how do you make the schools accessible for them, for students with disabilities, but also creating those champions and creating that awareness. If you're teaching human resources, teach about this topic. If you're teaching coding, teach about coding for accessibility. Build it into your classes. It shouldn't be that I'm going to get on my soapbox real quick. It shouldn't be an add-on. It should be built, in my opinion, it should be built into all the core curriculum that you're already teaching about, because it should just be part of life. It is part of life. So thank you everybody for your time. Please be sure to go back to the main event platform to access the plenary session link for the closing panel. And thank you for your time. And thank you, Caroline. This was fun.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. And thank you, everyone. And please find either one of us on LinkedIn or elsewhere.
Yeah.
None of us get good at this on our own. So please rely on each other in this room. Reach out to myself and Suzanne. We are in this together.
Thank you.